Okay, well, I guess during my 50s, I would say, as I had the best part of a decade at a company called Thomson Reuters, which is now called Refinitiv, which is now part of the London Stock Exchange, as these things inevitably change. And I guess, to put it simply, maybe the first 5 years of that 10 years was, shall we say, professional and dynamic. And maybe the second 5 years, I started perhaps thinking, you know what, maybe I'm done with this a little bit, and perhaps getting a little bit stale, and maybe I didn't want to seek another sort of corporate sort of opportunity, and I wanted to explore other things. And one thing I'd always done in my life really was I'd help people in a sort of coaching capacity in sport. I've been a hockey coach for juniors, and I've done a bit of football refereeing, and so I kind of like the idea of helping people. I also used to do some teaching to new entrants to the company about how our division works or how the bond market works, and so I always done a little bit of the teaching side. But what really struck me a lot was I found myself spending a lot of time with interns and people at our company, helping them write cover letters, helping them with their CVs, helping them prep for interviews. And I kind of really enjoyed that kind of role. And they seemed to start having success in getting the positions that they were going for. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to write a blog. And generally it was how young people, many of them seeking graduate type positions, but not completely that, how they go about getting employed, and advice around CVs, cover letters, interviews, the actual tactics of job hunting themselves. So there's many ways to go about getting a job, and really have people to present themselves as sort of a good prospect to an employer. And so I wrote a blog, and with the help of my 18-year-old nephew, who was pretty IT sort of savvy. And at that stage, if I had 20 people look at the blog in a week, then that was a successful sort of week. And then numbers started to increase. And then I decided, well, you know what, I'm going to do a few talks at university for no money or anything, while still at the company I was working for. So I approached my son's university. They put me in contact with the business department, and I went down all the way to Exeter. It was interesting, my son at the time said to me, although my motives were not mainly financial, really, my son said to me, Dad, there's no money in this. The idea of writing blogs and all that kind of thing. So I spoke at Exeter, and then one thing led to another. Exeter recommended me to another university, so I started doing a couple of talks there. I spoke at a couple of London universities, including the London School of Economics and Imperial, which, as you can imagine, quite a demanding audience. You know, these guys were asking me some tough questions. Luckily, they sent a few of those questions in advance. So, and then I kept going with that for about a year or so. And then there was a guy at the company I was working for. He said, do you want me to introduce me to a guy at Lancaster University I know who's head of accounting? I said, sure. And so I traveled all the way up to Lancaster to meet a guy there. And they thought the idea of having a specialist with kind of real industry kind of knowledge, doesn't necessarily have to be financial markets for other people, but for me it was all around financial markets, to help their students in their careers capacity was a very interesting prospect. So basically I started doing a bit of work for them. I did tell my company I was doing this bit of work for them. Again, one thing led to another, and the feedback was kind of really good, and I was doing it from a real vocational sort of perspective. And then, as can happen to a lot of 50-something people with grey hairs, the prospect of redundancy kind of loomed at the company, and I sort of stuck my hand up for it. And I took it because I decided I was going down this vocational sort of career advice kind of route, relatively full-time, or 70% full-time, shall we say. And so I made that transition. And it was still a challenging transition because, as many people know, when you work in the corporate world for 30 years or so, to then shift into the non-corporate world or just something else is a real challenge. It's a real test to your identity. I think it's a test to your confidence. And but I decided to go for it. I then, on the back of that, I approached Lancaster and said, do you want to increase our arrangement from what it currently was, which was very light at the time? And they said they did. And so I started doing a few more days a week for them, traveling up to Lancaster quite a lot, which I still do now. So I was giving career advice. A couple of other universities wanted me to speak and do workshops for their students, and I then started charging some money for this advice. It's very difficult to know what to charge for things, but one learns once you get into the kind of landscape. And then things were going well, and I'd got my new identity. I'd been through that 12 or 18 months sort of transition, I'd say, and was starting to excel. I was starting to enjoy it, and clearly this was turning out to be, you know, a good move. Sometimes I think maybe I should have made this move 15 years ago, but I think life perhaps doesn't always work like that. You have to come to this, perhaps going through a tiny bit of crisis at the time to get there, or even more than a tiny bit of a crisis. So I was doing all this careers work, particularly at Lancaster University, and all of a sudden, one of the financial markets tutors left on very short notice, and they had a course starting in fixed income in about 12 days' time. And they said, would I do it? Because I had some fixed income background. And I looked at the syllabus and I thought, well, I can do half of it, but I can't do the other half because, you know, some heavy quantitative stuff which I couldn't handle at all. And I said, I can do half of it. I said, fine. So I did this half, and I thought long about this idea of teaching because it's another commitment that I really want to do it. And I really enjoyed it. And somebody else took the second half of the 3-month module. And they said, Paul, that went pretty well. How about doing this full-time next year? And I said, again, I thought long and hard about it. It was a big commitment to take on a teaching role on top of the coaching. And I really saw myself as a coach, as my main core sort of job, shall we say, or vocation. But I said yes to it. I said, as long as I can do my own course on financial markets, and I can bring in basically what I want to bring in, of course, say I'll advise them in advance what I'm going to teach. And so I started teaching. And basically it went down very extremely well at university because students had all the years speaking to academics who really hadn't spent a day working in industry. And here was me coming from the coalface, talking to them about financial crisis and stock markets and electronic trading and regulation and how it really works. And they really were drawn to the kind of real world nature to it, on top of the theory, which obviously I covered as well, really. So I started with 40 students 3 years ago, and I've just finished marking exam papers. I never thought I would ever say that term, but I mark exam papers for 262 students. Some numbers have really increased over the past 2 or 3 years, again, with very high student satisfaction. So half of my job now is career coaching for people who want to enter the financial world, and half of my time is teaching a financial markets sort of module. And I've really enjoyed the teaching aspect of it, and so that has proved a good decision. Well, my son said there's no money in it, and he said, Dad, there's just no money in writing a blog. And maybe there isn't any money in writing a blog, but one thing then led to another, of course. And you know, I don't know, whereas the standard careers advisor at a university probably earns £30,000 or £32,000 a year, you know, I'm on a level up from there at university because they see me, and that's a significant level up, because they see me as a specialist, see me as bringing something that nobody else in the careers or university arena could bring. So that is, so I do about every 6 months remind my son about his comments, and in a light-hearted kind of way. And my kids actually are blown away about what they've seen Dad do, quite honestly, which has been really obviously heartwarming. But also they've seen me from being a little bit, say, stale and choosed off at work to starting my own company, limited company. There's only me in it, but and then building a whole second or third career, whatever you want to call it. And it's funny, a lot of my friends who around this sort of 60, 62 kind of age, they're all talking about giving up, retiring, or cutting down. That's fine, but it's not something I want to do. And I'm sure I perhaps don't want to work 100%, but it's you know, I've got something that I want to do for the next several years, really. And you know, to get students thanking you for, in their words, changing their lives, you know, that's a very nice email and message to receive, you know. And so I think to do that is quite a big driver, really. Well, I definitely want to carry on for the next several years, but I'm actually at the stage now, again, I never really thought I would properly say this, whereby I'm turning down invitations to do paid work in this area, only because I don't quite want to work at 110%, you know. So saying no is not easy when you've been through all that time, when you've been desperate for some people to have you in and perhaps pay you and everything. So saying no is not an easy thing to do. But again, I think it's kind of like a natural sort of progression, really. As I mentioned, I do a lot of work with Lancaster, so it's very important I do a stellar job for them. You know, I don't mind working 5 days, even 7 days a week, but it might be 10 o'clock till 3 o'clock or 10 o'clock till 4 o'clock. It's not going to be 8:30 till 5:30. That's not something that I look to do at this stage. But I do think clearly there's a lot of flexibility in the workplace these days, and with certain institutions there's a lot of flexibility around, you know, if people have got something to offer. Yes, so for example, a big hobby of mine over the last couple of years is Latin and ballroom dancing. So you know, we're filming this thing at 11:30 this morning. Well, at 1:30 I'm going out this afternoon to a dance in Hertfordshire, and I'll enjoy that. I might come back and do an hour's tonight when I come in. If there's nothing urgent, I'll leave it till tomorrow morning. So what I'm saying is I'm very fortunate, but I think it's available elsewhere. In these sort of kind of roles and endeavors, I think there's flexibility around your schedule. Sure. Between January, February and March, I do teach a financial markets module. So I'll go up to Lancaster University for 3 days a week for 10 weeks. And that's quite intense, quite honestly. But then other times of the year, and going into the summer particularly, I've got a lot of flexibility. So I'm prepared to work hard, but I do need flexibility. And I do think, you know, it's more available than ever before, not certainly in the normal workplace, and I think in these kinds of roles, probably even more so. One, apart from thinking it's crucially important, I'd say I'm fortunate, but on the other hand, I have put myself out there over the past 3 or 4 years, doing all sorts of uncomfortable stuff and not sure whether I can do it, and working in sort of alien sort of institutions. I mean, I'm not an academic, but here I am teaching a 3rd-year module, you know, and it has given me a huge amount of purpose. You know, for students to say that's the best module that I've done for in 3 years is a lovely thing to hear. To have, you know, to have 262 students sign up from 43 years ago, that's incredible. That gives a great feeling sort of inside. But I think particularly on the careers work I do, whereby students, you know, are very complimentary and they say, you made a big difference to my life. I've got the job. I've got my dream job. And to me, it does give purpose and meaning in a massive sort of way. And I'd even say that to me, that is greater than happiness, because I think happiness can come and go a little bit. But when you've got purpose and meaning, then I think that it means you can push through some tough situations or difficult person or whatever it is. So it's been a massive positive influence on my life.